parents funded my golden sibling's wedding, ignored me, so I got revenge. So, I'm the firstborn. You think that would mean something, right? That being the first kid would come with a little bit of, I don't know, attention? But nah, my life has basically been a masterclass in what it's like to be completely invisible. And honestly, I've been feeling this way since the day my sister was born. She's just 2 years younger than me, but it might as well be a lifetime. From the start, she was like this magnet, always pulling everyone in. Relatives, neighbors, even random people on the street would stop to gush over her. My parents ate it up, they loved showing her off. And I faded into the background. No one was stopping my parents in the grocery store to say how adorable I was. I was just kind of there. At first, it wasn't so bad. I mean, I didn't really know any better when I was a kid. I'd watch my sister getting all this attention, all the toys she wanted, and a yes for almost every little request. It was like she had some sort of magic touch with our parents. Meanwhile, I'd ask for something simple, like a new book or even a small toy. And I'd get this big speech about not being wasteful or how we can't always have everything we want. But then, not even 5 minutes later, they'd be giving my sister the exact thing they just denied me. When we were little, I brushed it off. Kids don't really overthink things. I just figured, okay, maybe I don't need as much. I was the quiet kid anyway. The one who liked books, drawing, and playing with Legos by myself. My parents probably saw that as me not needing much attention, so they didn't bother giving it to me. My sister, on the other hand, she was loud, funny, and charming in a way that seemed to make people instantly love her. She could walk into any room and make everyone smile. Meanwhile, I'd be the kid off to the side, hoping no one noticed me too much. But as we got older, the differences became more and more obvious. By the time we hit school, it was like I was living in some weird reality where I was my sister's shadow. Teachers, classmates, even my parents, everyone would talk about how fun and friendly she was. It didn't matter that I was the one with the good grades or that I worked hard. I was just her sister, the one that people barely noticed. At school, it was the same story. She'd make friends without even trying, always surrounded by people who thought she was the greatest thing ever. I was the kid in the back, nose buried in a book, not wanting to talk to anyone. People thought I was weird. I didn't mind it at first because I figured, hey, at least I didn't have to deal with all the fake smiles and pretending. But then my sister started to get, well, mean about it. She'd say stuff like, can you just not be awkward for once? Or, you're kind of embarrassing to be around. It was like she couldn't stand the fact that we were related. And honestly, sometimes it felt like my parents couldn't either. My dad once joked about how he couldn't believe we came from the same gene pool when I didn't want to go to one of her social events. They'd brush it off as teasing, but it got old real fast. It wasn't even about jealousy at that point. It was just straight up tiring. Tiring to always be overlooked. Tiring to be the awkward one. And tiring to watch my sister soak up every bit of attention like a sponge. She could do the bare minimum and get praised, while I could bust my ass and get a shrug. Maybe a quick good job if I was lucky. And let me tell you, nothing cements the whole forgotten child vibe like family gatherings. We'd go to these big family dinners, and the second we'd walk in, it was like a parade for her. Oh, look who's here. It's the star of the family. Meanwhile, I'd just get a pat on the head, like I was some loyal pet who'd tagged along. I'd try to join conversations, but they'd barely acknowledge me. My sister would talk about her day, and everyone would hang on every word, laughing and nodding along. I'd chime in, and suddenly, people needed to go check on something in the kitchen. I started hating those family events, honestly. It was like I was being dragged into a room where I was reminded over and over that I was a supporting character in someone else's life story. My sister's life story, and she knew it too. She'd shoot me these smug little looks whenever people fawned over her, like she was saying, see, this is how it's done. She was the fun one, the cool one, and I was the quiet one, the weird one. It didn't even feel like we were sisters most of the time, more like distant roommates forced to share a space. I remember once when I actually stood up for myself. Well, kind of. I was about 14, and we were at another one of those never-ending family dinners. My aunt had just finished talking about how amazing my sister was, going on and on about her latest achievements, which, by the way, were just her trying out for cheerleading or something. My aunt turned to me, and I thought, finally, she's going to ask about me. But all she said was, "So, how does it feel to have such a popular sister?" I snapped. I muttered something like, "How does it feel to be ignored every single day?" My aunt looked at me, totally confused, like I just spoke in another language. And my mom? She just sighed and said, "Oh, don't be so dramatic." Like my feelings were some sort of inconvenience they had to deal with. After that, I just shut down even more. Looking back, it's kind of crazy how much I kept inside. My sister would get all this support, people cheering her on for everything she did. I barely got a second glance. It got to the point where I just stopped sharing things. Why bother, you know? Why tell my family about my interests or my achievements when they wouldn't care? It was easier to just keep my head down and go along with it. My sister was the one they wanted to hear from, the one they wanted to see succeed. I was just there. But here's the thing. Even though I was quiet, I wasn't blind. I saw exactly what was happening. And even if they didn't say it out loud, I knew I was always going to be second place in my own family. My sister could get away with anything, and my parents would still look at her like she hung the stars in the sky. I, on the other hand, was just the other kid. As time went on, things with my sister just kept escalating. High school was like the golden age of her popularity. While I'd spent my time diving into books and trying to keep a low profile, she was the queen bee. She had this whole entourage of friends, like she was the lead actress in some high school drama, and everyone else, including me, were just background extras. Teachers knew her. She was invited to every party, and even my parents couldn't go a week without bragging about her. Now, I'm not saying I was expecting some huge look at my other daughter parade, but the difference in treatment was just plain brutal. My parents would gush to everyone about her latest cheer competition or whatever she was doing. But when I came home with straight A's, it was like, "Oh, that's nice, honey." Nothing more. I remember thinking, wow, a whole 5 seconds of acknowledgement. Truly, I am blessed. And then there were the events. Oh man, the endless string of family gatherings, school events, and random dinners out with my parents and their friends. All of which, of course, ended up being about her. I'd sit there, hearing the same story for the 10th time about how my sister won her school's popularity contest or something equally shallow, while I just poked at my food, praying no one would notice me. Half the time, they didn't. I was almost like a ghost in my own family. My sister loved every second of it, too. She'd flash that smug smile every time someone praised her, and she'd shoot these little glances my way, like, "See? Everyone loves me." She was aware of the favoritism, and rather than leveling the playing field, she leaned into it. Hard. I catch her accidentally talking about how much fun she had at some party to make it clear I wasn't invited, or making little digs about how I didn't fit in because I was too quiet. She wanted me to know she was better, and she wanted me to feel it. One time during junior year, I actually got selected for a big science competition. I was pretty excited because for once, it felt like maybe I'd get a chance to do something cool and show people I wasn't just my sister's awkward sibling. So I told my parents, and their reaction? "Oh, but that's on the same day as your sister's cheerleading performance." Like, okay. So I asked if they could maybe make it to both, or at least come to mine for a bit. They looked genuinely confused, like it hadn't even crossed their minds that I'd want them to show up for me. That was when it clicked. My sister's stuff? That was important. Mine? Optional if it didn't conflict with her plans. I didn't even try arguing about it, because deep down, I knew it was pointless. They'd already picked sides, and there was no way I was going to change their minds. They went to her cheer event, of course, and didn't even bother to ask how my competition went afterward. The funny thing is I knew I was different, and I was fine with it. But it's hard to be okay with it when your family treats different like it's a bad thing. I wasn't the fun one or the social one. I didn't light up a room when I walked in or make everyone laugh, but I was good at other things. Things that were apparently too boring for anyone to care about. It all came to a boiling point during prom season. My sister went all out. She had a fancy dress, got her hair and nails done, rented a limo, the whole works. My parents were all over it, of course. They were just thrilled, taking photos, talking about how gorgeous she looked. And then there was me. I didn't even want to go to prom, but just out of curiosity, I mentioned it to my parents to see if they'd have any reaction. Spoiler alert, they didn't. My mom just laughed and said, "Oh, well, honey, you're not really the type for that sort of thing, are you?" I mean, she wasn't wrong, but it stung. When prom night came around, I stayed home, and as expected, it was all about my sister. I could hear them all getting ready in the other room, my mom and sister giggling, my dad telling her how proud he was, the usual. It was like watching a movie, except I was in the audience instead of on the screen. I holed up in my room, reading a book and pretending I didn't care. But the truth was I did care. I cared a lot more than I wanted to admit. The next morning, the prom stories began. Every single detail of her night was dissected over breakfast while I sat there, silent as usual. They didn't ask about my night or how I felt about not going. It was like I was invisible again, just sitting there, hearing all about my sister's magical night, as if it were the most important thing in the world. The thing that got me, though, was how they seemed so completely clueless about how all this made me feel. They were mean about it. They just didn't see it. Like in their minds, everything was perfectly balanced. They had the fun daughter who was their pride and joy. And then there was me, the quiet one who didn't really need or want any attention, right? To them, it was like I was happy in the background, doing my quiet things while my sister took the spotlight. After prom, my sister started dating this guy who was, predictably, the popular football player. My parents loved him. They'd invite him over, chat him up like he was already part of the family, and my sister would act like she was the queen of the world. He barely noticed me, of course, but that was nothing new. He was her world, and as usual, I was just part of the scenery. The favoritism got even worse once she started dating him. Suddenly, everything she did was even more amazing because she was doing it with such a great guy. It was exhausting. I could barely walk into a room without hearing about what an incredible couple they made or how they were meant for each other. It was like my family had become her personal cheer squad, and I was the outsider looking in. It was around that time I started to really resent her. Not because she was popular or had friends or whatever, but because she knew exactly how it made me feel, and she didn't care. If anything, she seemed to enjoy it. She liked that she was the favorite, the golden child, and she liked that I knew it too. She'd throw little comments my way like, "You wouldn't get it?" or "You're not really into stuff like this, are you?" Whenever we were around our parents, it was subtle, but it was enough to make me feel small, like I didn't belong. Looking back, I wonder if my parents ever realized just how much they fed into it. Maybe to them, it was just normal sibling rivalry, something that we'd grow out of. But it was way more than that. It was years of feeling like I didn't matter, like I was the backup kid, and the more they played in her hand, the more I felt myself drifting further away from them, from her, from everyone. By the time I hit my senior year, I was pretty much done trying to fit into my family. I knew where I stood, and I wasn't interested in bending over backward just to get a little acknowledgement. I'd buried myself in schoolwork, mostly because studying was one of the few things I could control. My grades were solid, and I figured if I could just get a scholarship and go to college, maybe things would finally change. Around that time, my sister was gearing up to go to a local college nearby. No scholarship, no big academic achievements. She just picked a school, and my parents wrote the checks. They didn't even bat an eye. Like paying thousands a year was just no big deal. Meanwhile, I was obsessing over every single application and scholarship form, trying to figure out how I could manage tuition without putting myself in debt. My parents? They never offered to help. Not once. Not that I expected it, but part of me thought maybe, just maybe, they'd throw me a bone and offer some support. Nope, nada. The night I got my acceptance letter from a university, along with a full scholarship, by the way, I thought, all right, maybe this is my moment. I came home, letter in hand, ready to tell them. And sure, I wasn't expecting fireworks or anything, but a good job would have been nice. Instead, I got hit with, oh well, that's great, followed by my mom turning to my sister and asking her what she wanted for dinner. It was like I just told them I got a job at the local grocery store, not a full ride to a top school. It was then that I realized, in the clearest way possible, that they just didn't care. They genuinely didn't. My achievements, my hard work, it was all background noise. My sister's life, her social status, her relationship drama, front and center, always. And I can't even explain how much that hit me. It was like getting punched in the gut, but silently, in a way only I felt. Over the summer before college, I started pulling back even more. I spent most of my time at the library or with a couple of friends who understood what was going on, though I didn't exactly spell it out for them. They just got it in that unspoken way, and that was enough. Being home was exhausting. Every single day was another reminder that my family had picked a favorite, and it wasn't me. I was so ready to leave by the time August rolled around that I packed up a week early. My parents barely noticed. The morning I left for college was surreal. My dad mumbled a half-hearted good luck, and my mom just said, drive safe. They didn't help me load up the car or even walk me out. My sister didn't even get out of bed to say goodbye. It was just me loading up my entire life in the car alone. But honestly, it felt kind of fitting. I'd been on my own for so long. What was a few hundred miles more? College was a breath of fresh air. For the first time, I could just be me without constantly being compared to her. No one knew my family, no one cared who was the favorite, and that was a huge relief. I threw myself into my studies, joined a couple of clubs, and made friends who actually liked me for me. I got so wrapped up in this new life that for a while I barely thought about my family at all. I'd talk to them maybe once a month, quick check-in calls that usually ended with me listening to updates about my sister's life. Whatever, I'd put the phone down, let them talk, and focus on my own thing. Things were going pretty well for a while, until Thanksgiving break rolled around. I had mixed feelings about going back, but I figured it was just a few days and I could deal with it. When I got home, though, the favoritism hit me in the face like I'd never left. My parents barely asked about my classes or how I was adjusting. The minute I walked in the door, it was back to my sister's latest drama, something about a breakup, a new guy, whatever. My mom actually said it's so great to have everyone back under one roof, as if I'd never really left. It was like they still saw me as just there, the invisible kid, the background character in their happy little family scene. And then at dinner, my mom made this big speech about how proud she was of us. She went on and on about my sister's strength during her breakup and how she was blossoming into this amazing person. She barely mentioned me at all. My dad chimed in, talking about how it was important to support each other, as if I hadn't just spent the last few years being overlooked in every way possible. I sat there, trying to keep a straight face, but inside I was boiling. After that, I stopped making much of an effort with them. Christmas came and went, and I didn't bother bringing gifts or even trying to engage. They didn't notice, or if they did, they didn't care. The few friends I had from high school noticed, though, and one of them finally asked, "Is everything all right with your family?" It was the first time anyone had actually asked me that, and it caught me off guard. I didn't even know how to respond, so I just shrugged and said, "Yeah, it's fine." But it wasn't. Going back to college after winter break felt like coming up for air. It was clear to me now. I was done trying to fit into a family that didn't see me. My life was my own now, and that realization was both freeing and a bit sad. They'd never understand how much their actions had hurt me, and by that point, I'd stopped wanting them to. As I got closer to finishing my degree, I decided I wasn't even going to bother inviting them to graduation. Why should I? They hadn't cared about any other part of my life. So what was the point? I didn't need them there, pretending to be proud for a few hours when I knew they'd go right back to focusing on my sister the second we left the ceremony. Instead, I invited my closest friends, people who actually knew me, supported me, and celebrated my successes without a second thought. When I walked across that stage, they cheered louder than anyone. I'll never forget that moment because, for once, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be, with the people who mattered. After the ceremony, I got a half-hearted congratulations text from my mom. I didn't even bother replying. I was done putting in effort, done trying to get them to notice me. They could keep worshiping my sister for all I cared. I had my own life now, and I was finally in control of it. That realization was worth more than any empty praise they could have offered me. Leaving them behind, in a way, was easier than I thought it'd be. They'd made their choices clear, and I was just choosing to do the same. It wasn't revenge or bitterness. It was just reality. After graduation, I thought maybe my relationship with my family would improve with some distance, or at least become more bearable. I was wrong. Once I got settled into my first job, I started hearing from them even less, which honestly I was fine with. They'd check in every once in a while, but the calls were brief, and, as always, full of updates about my sister. It was clear I was just an afterthought. What really got to me, though, was how completely out of touch they were with my life. I'd tell my mom something about work, and her response would always somehow swing back to my sister's latest adventure. She was working a few part-time gigs here and there. Nothing really serious. But to my parents, it was like she was building some grand career. They talk about how hard she was working or how proud they were of her. Meanwhile, I just landed my first real job, paying my own bills, living on my own, and they barely registered it. It was like I was playing this completely separate role in the family, one they didn't care to pay attention to. One day, out of nowhere, I got a text from my mom asking if I'd come home for dinner. It felt weirdly formal, and I almost ignored it. But something told me to go. Maybe there'd been some massive change of heart, or they finally wanted to acknowledge me. Spoiler, they didn't. When I showed up, my sister was already there, laughing with my parents like they just had the most amazing time without me. I sat down, already feeling like the odd one out. As usual, they started in with their updates on her life. New friends, new job ideas, all the big plans she had. I was just sitting there, waiting for any sign that they cared about what I was doing. But the night kept going and nothing. I felt like I'd wandered into someone else's family dinner. Finally, my dad turned to me, and I thought, here we go. Maybe they'll ask me about my life. But instead he hit me with, your sister is really working hard on finding her passion. You should be proud of her. I had to bite my tongue to stop from laughing. Proud? Of what exactly? I'd been out there actually making a living, supporting myself, and they wanted me to feel pride for her exploring her passions. It felt like some kind of twisted joke. I couldn't hold back anymore. I asked them, "Do you even know what I do for work?" They all stared at me, like I'd just asked the most complicated question in the world. My mom mumbled something about an office job, and my dad just shrugged. My sister was looking at me with that same smug expression she'd had since we were kids. I could feel my blood boiling. They didn't have a clue, not even the faintest idea. The silence was uncomfortable, but I pushed through it. I told them all about my job, what I actually did, how hard I'd worked to get there, the hours I put in, the stress I dealt with. For once, I put it all out there, not holding anything back. They sat there, kind of stunned, like they'd never realized I had an actual life outside of being the quiet kid who followed along with whatever they wanted. And just when I thought maybe I'd finally gotten through to them, my mom looked over at my sister and said, "See, that's why you need to start thinking about a real career." I was floored. My whole speech, everything I just said, it wasn't about me at all. It was just fuel for them to push my sister to do better. I realized right then that no matter what I did, how much I accomplished, they would never see me the way they saw her. That dinner was the last straw. I made up my mind that night that I was done. Done with the forced family gatherings. Done with the constant comparisons. done with being the overlooked sibling. I went home and deleted the family group chat from my phone. I stopped calling, stopped answering texts, just stopped trying. And the sad part? They didn't seem to notice. A few weeks later, I got a call from my mom, but I ignored it. The voicemail she left was about my sister, as usual. Something about how she was struggling to find her path and could use a bit of support. Support from me, the kid they'd ignored for years. They wanted me to support her. It was honestly laughable. I went about my life working hard, saving money, and actually building something for myself. For the first time, I was free of their judgment, free of constantly being overlooked. It was like I cut away this massive weight that had been dragging me down my entire life. I felt lighter, happier, like I could finally be who I wanted to be without their expectations hanging over my head. But then came my sister's birthday, and I got a text from my mom. "Your sister would love it if you came by for her birthday dinner. She's been missing you." Missing me? Since when? I hadn't seen her in months, and from what I'd gathered, she'd been living her best life. Still, curiosity got the better of me, and against my better judgment, I went. Walking into that dinner was like stepping into a time machine. Nothing had changed. Same family, same dynamics, same feeling of being invisible. My sister was soaking up the attention, my parents were doting on her, and I was just there. They hardly acknowledged me aside from a quick, "Oh, you made it," from my mom. I sat through that dinner, watching them laugh and joke like I didn't exist, and it hit me. Nothing I ever did would change this. They'd made their choice long ago, and I wasn't part of it. After dinner, my mom pulled me aside, trying to sound concerned. She told me she was worried about how distant I'd been and how my sister felt like I didn't support her enough. That was it for me. I looked her straight in the eye and told her I'd been supporting myself for years, with no help, no praise, and certainly no support from them. Her face went blank, like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. I didn't stick around for her to process it. I left without saying goodbye, got in my car, and just drove. And for the first time, I felt like I didn't owe them anything. No explanations, no apologies, nothing. I had been bending over backward my whole life, trying to be part of their little club, and it was finally clear that I didn't need them. Meeting my fiancée changed everything for me. For the first time in my life, I was with someone who actually saw me, listened to me, and wanted me around. He didn't care about who my sister was or how my family acted. He just loved me for who I was. It was like I could finally take a breath. He showed me I didn't need anyone else's approval, especially not from a family that had always made me feel like I wasn't enough. He was the one who encouraged me to start setting boundaries, something I'd never been able to do on my own. Before him, I'd just take whatever my family dished out, thinking that maybe someday they'd wake up and actually see me. But he helped me realize that waiting for them to change was pointless. He would say, "Why keep bending over backward for people who don't give back?" And that really stuck with me. I started to understand that I didn't owe anyone constant validation, especially not people who never gave me any in return. When he proposed, I was over the moon. Here was someone who actually wanted me in his life, who looked at me like I was the only person in the room. I was beyond excited to share the news. But deep down, I knew my family's reaction wasn't going to match mine. Still, I figured I'd be polite and tell them in person. Maybe some small part of me still held out hope that they'd surprise me and finally show some real excitement for something in my life. So, I showed up at my parents' house with the ring on my finger, practically glowing. I told them the big news, expecting, well, something, but all I got was a quick, "Oh, congrats, that's nice." It was the same tone they used when I told them I'd graduated or got my first job. Just casual. Like I'd told them I'd bought a new pair of shoes. Nothing major. No questions about the proposal. No interest in meeting him anytime soon. Nothing. Then, almost as an afterthought, my mom said, "Oh, and just so you know, we spent all our savings on your sister's wedding, so we won't be able to contribute to yours." Just like that. I shouldn't have been surprised, but it still hit me like a punch. They'd gone all out for my sister, thrown her this huge celebration, and now they had nothing left. Not even a little bit of support, financial or otherwise, for me. I stood there, nodding, pretending like it didn't bother me. But inside, something snapped. I knew then and there that I didn't need them at my wedding. They didn't care enough to support me. So why should I go out of my way to include them in what would be one of the happiest days of my life? As I walked out of their house, it felt like I was finally letting go of the last bit of hope I'd been holding on to. For years, I'd been waiting for them to recognize me, to be genuinely happy for me, to show up for me in the same way they always had for my sister. But this was it, the final straw. They wouldn't be coming to my wedding because I wasn't inviting them. And for the first time, I felt free. When I got home from that last conversation with my parents, I knew what I needed to do. I pulled out the wedding invitations I'd set aside for my family, stared at them for a minute, and then ripped them in half. Piece by piece, I shredded every single one until there was nothing left. It felt like I was finally cutting them out of my life for real, not just in words, but in action. This was my day, and I didn't need anyone there who'd made me feel like I wasn't enough. Over the next few weeks, my family kept asking about wedding plans. Venue, dates, the usual questions. I'd brush them off, change the subject, or just give vague answers. It wasn't like they'd ever shown genuine interest in my life before, so dodging their questions felt almost natural. But then, as expected, my sister eventually found out about the wedding date through social media. She must have told my parents because suddenly I was getting hit with a flood of texts and calls. The messages started out with the usual small talk like, "Oh, so when's the big day? And you didn't tell us you set a date." But when they realized I hadn't invited them, the tone changed fast. They were furious, sending me guilt-laden messages about family and respect. My mom sent me this long text about how hurt they were, saying things like, "We've always been there for you," and "This is how you treat us?" The irony of that statement was honestly laughable. I didn't feel a single ounce of guilt. For the first time in my life, I was doing something entirely for me, without worrying about how they'd feel. They'd had plenty of chances to be there for me, to make me feel like I mattered, and they'd ignored every single one. So I replied with the truth. I told them it was a small wedding, and I'd only invited the most important people. I didn't sugarcoat it, didn't make any excuses. They didn't like hearing it, but that wasn't my problem. They kept trying to guilt-trip me, going on about family bonds and how weddings are about bringing everyone together. It was almost comical, really, because they'd never shown this level of concern for family when it was my happiness on the line. So I stood my ground. This was my day, and I wasn't going to let them hijack it just so they could show up, make a few half-hearted comments, and then go back to ignoring me. The day of the wedding arrived, and it was perfect. I was surrounded by people who genuinely cared about me, friends who'd supported me through everything, people who actually saw me and celebrated my happiness. There was laughter, love, and for the first time, I felt completely at peace. I didn't once feel like I was missing anything by not having my family there. In fact, their absence made the day feel even more like my own. Afterward, I heard from a couple of distant relatives who'd apparently caught wind of the scandal that I'd left my parents out of the wedding. They messaged me with the usual, "You should have invited them. They're still your family." Nonsense. But I'd made my decision, and I had no regrets. This was my life, and for once I was living it on my own terms. The day of the wedding was everything I'd hoped for. It was small, just a handful of friends, my fiancé's family, and the people who'd genuinely been there for us. No fake smiles, no forced family loyalty nonsense, just real support and happiness. I'd been so worried about whether it would feel like something was missing without my family, but it turns out I'd been worrying for nothing. Without the tension and the constant need to be good enough for them, I was finally able to relax and enjoy one of the biggest days of my life. My sister apparently didn't take too kindly to being left out, though. About an hour into the ceremony, she started blowing up my phone, firing off texts and missed calls. She was calling me selfish, accusing me of tearing the family apart, and asking how I could do this to my own blood. I remember looking at my phone, seeing her name pop up, and feeling nothing. No guilt, no need to explain myself. Just a quiet, satisfying realization that I didn't owe them anything anymore. I slipped my phone back into my bag and went right back to enjoying the day. My husband and I exchanged our vows. And as I looked around, seeing all the faces of people who genuinely wanted the best for us, I felt this overwhelming sense of peace. It was like the weight of years of being ignored, dismissed, and put second was finally gone. I'd chosen my own happiness over theirs, and it felt incredible. The reception was simple, but perfect. No over-the-top decorations, no stress. Just good food, music, and laughter. At one point, my best friend raised a toast, and she said something that hit me hard. Here's to the family we choose. That one sentence summed up everything I'd been trying to put into words for years. Family isn't just about blood. It's about the people who show up for you, who care without conditions, who treat you like you actually matter. And on that day, I was surrounded by family. The kind I'd chosen, and who'd chosen me right back. As the night went on, I didn't give my family back home a second thought. I wasn't waiting for some apology that would never come, or hoping they'd finally realize they'd messed up. I knew they wouldn't. They'd never seen me, not really. And if they couldn't celebrate with me on my wedding day, then they didn't deserve to be a part of my life going forward.